Welcome to the Ride This Out podcast, where we talk about how to improve your mental health and strengthen your connection to nature and your community, all through one simple solution: the bicycle. My name is Zach Golding, and I'm a licensed clinical social worker and mental health therapist. I'll be your host as we discuss the power of pedaling. All right, welcome into this week's session. I have Liam Gousios from the For Those Who Ride podcast. I had the opportunity to interview Liam. Great conversation. He had the opportunity to interview me as well. I will be featured on his podcast in the upcoming week, so keep an eye out on that. But go check out his show, For Those Who Ride. You can find it on Spotify, Apple, wherever. But it was really fun to kind of pick his brain about the podcasting world, how he got into it, and he does it professionally. He's a podcast producer for his day job, so his podcasts are very well done. Honestly, it sounds like something from NPR with the different edits and everything he has going on. So please go check it out. Listen to what he has to say here. He's great advice after he's worked in a shop and been around biking for so long. So great stuff. Thanks again, Liam. And anyone that is take something from this episode, please share it with them. Again, look up his show, share it with other people as well. Great conversations. He's had some awesome guests on his show as well. So enjoy this week's session with Liam. Liam, welcome to the show. I just want to have you go ahead and introduce yourself, who you are, where you're from, what you do, just all those good things. So go ahead.
Hey Zach, it's awesome to be here. Thank you for having me on. Super excited to continue to connect and kind of swap stories like this. Yeah. So I like to say I'm an avid rider. I love getting out on the bike. I've loved riding for years. Like you mentioned, I'm a podcaster. I do that hobby, with my own personal show. I do that professionally as well. So it's a cool little blend of my two worlds of bikes and podcasting, and then podcasting about bikes. Grew up in New England. That's where I am right now. So I, always felt super fortunate to have such a great access to just the outdoors in general. And that's really, I think, where a lot of this kind of stemmed, childhood camping trips or just, walks in the park or biking to friends' houses. So love the outdoors, love getting out, hiking a good mountain, going on a nice camping trip, all that stuff. And then I guess a quick little background of my bikes stuff. I always like to tell people, like, my first job ever, like in high school, was working at a bike shop. And excuse me. Sorry. So yeah, first job ever, like first job I got in high school was working at a bike shop. And that was really kind of where I fell in love with bikes. I'd been riding like a little bit before that, but that was really where I got like my first proper experience to like quote unquote like bike culture. And I really just fell in love with it from there. And it's just continued on ever. I caught the bug for bikes, and it's never left me. So yeah, that's kind of the quick intro on me.
I love it. And so I'm curious, because working at a bike shop, I mean, that takes a specific set of skills, right, to even get into that. But I mean, you did it in high school. So what was the motivation to start turning the wrench, going to the mechanic shop and working on bikes? Where did that come from?
Yeah, a couple things. So I got I got my first like quote unquote real bike. And my real bike, what I mean is like adult sized bike that wasn't, a 24-inch wheel kid's bike, right? And it was a Diamondback Insight hybrid. I rode that thing everywhere. I loved it. And I was just like, man, this is great. I want more of this feeling that I get when I ride. And I was like, oh, and I want a road bike too. And I was like, oh, the best way to get a road bike, like if I work at a shop and I get a discount on it. So I'm going to be honest, that was like a pretty big motivator for me to take that plunge, was because I was like, I want a road bike and I can get a discount on one if I work at a bike shop. So I started that, and so I was like 16 or 17, like selling bikes to people like on the weekends. Then summer rolled around, and that's what I was doing. It was a nice local shop. Shout out to Good Ales Bike Shop in Nashua. They're they're a Trek store now. They weren't independently owned when I was there. But yeah, that's really, where I kind of cut my teeth, so to speak. Um, but yeah, it's, again, as the more I rode around, the more I was like, I like bikes. I like talking to people about bikes. I very quickly became like the bike guy in my friend group. And I was like, hey, I can also, I can keep talking about bikes to people, but now I can also kind of get paid for it. And I was like, this is a sweet gig. It was a mile and a half from home. I rode into work, whenever it wasn't raining. And so, great way to save up, money for fun on the weekends, or a lot of it went back into bike parts. But yeah, so that's kind of how I got started.
I love it. Yeah, and it's always good to have a friend that knows about bikes but knows how to fix bikes too. I'm sure a lot of friends came to you with
Oh
with
man.
different tune-up
Yeah.
advice and everything, right?
Oh yeah. And even to this day, I'll still get texts that it's like, hey, what tires should I get? Or like, can you recommend any good shops here? And I want to be clear, like I'm kind of like laugh a little bit about it. I love those questions. Like I love when people like text me for stuff like that. Like it's a lot of fun to talk about that kind of thing.
Absolutely. Everyone wants to feel needed, and when you feel needed and spreading the joy of bicycle
Yeah.
riding, that's the best. That's the best. Well, cool. And yeah, so talk to me about your job, getting into the podcasting world. I mean, you do it professionally. Your podcast, for one, is very professionally produced. It's amazing. I love it. I'm definitely have some show envy when I listen to your
It's all
show. I'm like,
good,
man,
man.
this guy knows what he's doing, and I don't feel so bad because like, oh, he's a pro. Like literally, he is a
Yeah.
pro. So, but yeah, tell me how you got into that, the producing side of things, and how your podcast got started.
Yeah, so I'm gonna be honest, it was like really almost completely by accident. And what I mean by that is, so I was very fortunate. I like to say to go to the high school that I went to as a kid. Like I had access to like I went to like a STEM charter school, right? So while I was there, and again, super fortunate about just like the people I got to learn from, like all of the knowledge and expertise I gained there. A lot of it was focused on STEM. So in high school, I was like, oh, I want to go into biology, right? I want to go into actually, I want to go into cancer research. I was like, that's what I want to do. Um, and so then I graduated high school, and again, this whole time I'm like, oh, love bikes, love bikes. This is cool, right? Graduate high school, uh, go to college. Uh, Quickly realized that maybe biology is no longer for me. Chemistry, I still like biology. It was really chemistry was the real kicker. I'm gonna be honest. Chemistry was a tough one. And the way that my college set things up is they're like, yeah, you're basically you've got your three main areas of study, like your humanities, your social sciences, and then like your hard sciences, right? And they said, hey, if you're going to major in one of these, you also have to cluster in the other two areas. So you have to also study classes in those. And so my advisor, thankfully, was like, don't take biology, chemistry, and like calc all your freshman fall semester. She's like, that's not a good plan. And I was like, all right, if you say so. So I didn't. And then instead of taking calc, I took I'm gonna be honest, like almost on a complete whim. It was like Intro to Digital Media Studies because I was like, that sounds kind of cool. Um, Fell in love with that. I'd never really been exposed to it before. That more like creative side, like with computers, and so that really kind of I switched my major from bio to digital media, and then we were dabbling in sound, and I kind of also really fell in love with like the sound editing side of things. We were honestly, again, kind of really spoiled, really fortunate. We had like two recording studios on our campus, like full fledged, like you could record a Grammy worthy album in these studios on campus. So we were really kind of spoiled with what we had access to, fell in love with that. And then there was a podcasting course offered one semester, and I wanted to take it because it was kind of weird. They're like, we're going to make a podcast about taxidermy. And I know what you're thinking. Right? That sounds like super, super bizarre. It wasn't like a how-to. It was a history class kind of on like, here's the like greater implications of what taxidermy meant at that time, right? Because way back in the day, you couldn't take a photograph before the camera was invented. So the best way to preserve and like bring back to show like what an elephant looked like was to kill it, stuff it, and put it in a museum. But of course, there's a whole lot of, historical implications behind all of that, which if you want to learn more about that, you can go listen to the podcast that we made for that class. So did that class, loved it. They actually had me back to be like a TA the next season, next semester. So I continued doing that. And then I was like, okay, you know what? This is really kind of what I want to do. I graduated then in 2020. Not a great time to enter the workforce. With the whole pandemic thing going on, particularly that in an industry where you need to be close to someone holding a microphone to record them or setting up a microphone close to them, right? That kind of threw a bit of a wrench in those plans. So I actually ended up in a shop for a couple of years. And then as the pandemic kind of subsided, it was fortunate enough to find a position where I am now, editing, producing podcasts full time. And I've just hit my 2-year mark at the start of this month. So yeah, that's kind of how the slightly long-winded version of how I got into podcasting.
I love it. And, I'm a podcast junkie myself. And, just you talking about the taxidermy stuff, I'm like, man, that sounds like really interesting, And so I love that you can just kind of go down these different rabbit holes and stuff and just learn so much. And I'm sure as you've been doing your job and editing different stuff, you've learned a whole bunch. And so at what point did this idea come to you of like, hey, I want to make a podcast about bike riding, about those people that ride and their experience?
Yeah, so this is and like other creatively minded people out there could probably relate to this. This is kind of something that I've like had in the back of my mind where I'm like, I want to do this. I just got to take that leap where I'm like, okay, I know the conversation. So I've had this kind of in the back of my mind, kind of percolating, kind of cooking for like a couple years now. Like I think honestly, probably before I started my current job. But again, it was always one of those things where I was like, oh, I don't know if now's the right time. I got a lot going on. And then also there's some stuff of like, oh, do I really want to drop, money on a microphone right now? So there was also kind of part of that. But then honestly, I don't even really know what kicked it off. I think I was having a conversation with a friend who maybe also does some content, and we were just talking about it. I was like, I really want to do this. And he's like, honestly, man, just go for it. And I was like, you know what? And I was like, I realized I was like, I've got this. I know how to do this. Like, I know how to make a podcast and I can talk about bikes. Those are going to be the hardest parts. I just gotta take that initiative and I just gotta get that ball rolling. And then I don't know. I just like, yeah, let's do it. And so I started reaching out to some people and I was like, hey, do you want to come on this podcast that doesn't exist yet? And I got a surprising number of yeses. So that really kind of helped as well. It was like, hey, you know what? Other people actually also think that this is a good idea. And getting that positive feedback is just like, hey, okay, cool. There we go. So that's kind of where that's how long I've been starting this. And I can talk more about like why I've wanted to do this as well.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, again, the content that you've been doing, it's amazing. Just very professional, well done. But I've learned a whole lot from the different advocacy standpoints of it, talking about the bicycle kitchen. And I'm going to leave that as a teaser for people who are like, what are you talking about, bicycle kitchen? It's a fascinating episode talking about, just bike shops and getting more access to people that way. The biking in the winter. And then the other one, using bicycle riding as a tool for social justice. You got some awesome stuff, Liam. And honestly, I'm excited to be on it as well and share my experience. That was really cool. That was really fun to do that. So I'm excited to see where your show takes you and the different things that you got going. It's awesome.
Yeah. Well, and that's one of the things that's been so cool is like getting to connect with people like that and just like yourself and having these conversations. Because the more that I've kind of explained to people like why I do this show, the more I've kind of like clarified and better understood why I'm actually doing it. It's like the more I explain it, the better I understand it myself. And I've realized actually a lot of it comes just from like my own personal experiences of like how I identify with like, I always like to use the term like bicycling with a B rather than cycling with a C. To me, those are very different things. And there's a bigger conversation to be had around that. And I welcome that conversation. To me, cycling is about like Lycra and road bikes and going fast. To me, bicycling is about riding a bike or similar vehicle, right? Whether that's like a recumbent tricycle, et cetera, et cetera. But when I started working in shops, again, I wanted to get to do a lot of road biking, and I do own road bikes. I own, full suspension mountain bikes as well. But I mean, I have never been a very fast rider, right? I have never been, to be honest, a super frequent rider. Like there are people who they're like, yeah, I do easily 5,000 miles a season. And I'm like, all right, cool. I honestly maybe we'll cross 1,000 this summer, right? So I've never super related to that. I've never felt necessarily like I was a big part of that culture. I own a road bike. I like riding it, but I never felt like I was like a cyclist, right? But I have always felt and have always very strongly identified with riding a bicycle. And when I worked at that first shop, and again, I was in high school, I was still, developing my frontal lobe, right? I was still kind of understanding who I was as a person. I didn't really have the vocab or just the experience or like maybe even self reflection to kind of know what I was feeling then. And um, I started working at, REI in college. I just, it was a great job, outdoors related. And one of my coworkers, she was involved with like local advocacy scene. I very distinctly remember very vividly this conversation we were having. Um, where I was like, yeah, we really need to get more people into like the sport of riding a bike. She was like, it's not a sport. And I was like, well, I was like, what do you mean? And she's like, this doesn't have to be a sport. And that for me really was kind of like the pivotal moment where in my mind I was like, oh, yeah, it doesn't have to be about riding a road bike, right? It doesn't have to be the conversation isn't just like, and if we're talking about, like equality and equity, right? It doesn't just have to be about like, oh, how do we get like, let's say more women into cycling, right? We don't need to limit it to just the sport of riding a bike. It's just about riding a bike. And that for me really clicked is like, oh, yeah, I really like bikes, but I don't have to limit that purview of like how much I like bikes or my perspective of how much I like bikes through just the lens of cycling. Um, and from that, I realized that, okay, maybe there are a lot of other people who also feel that way, who are passionate, who are excited about bikes, or could be passionate and excited about bikes, but are presented with the like kind of options of like, oh, you got to either, if you want to like feel really passionately about this is what that looks like, right? You have to get up at 6 every morning. You have to go crush 50-mile rides. You got to wear skin tight Lycra. And do I do those things sometimes? Absolutely. But I also just like riding around, like going to the bike path and cruising. And so there are a lot of people who I feel like myself strongly relate to that. They identify with that. It's a part of them. But the greater, and I use this very kind of broad strokes, the greater industry and community from that can be very like, yeah, it's either cycling, mountain biking, and where do you fit into one of those? And it's like, well, some people just want to ride bikes and have fun. Um, so there's a lot of perspectives around that. Additionally, I think another reason is there's also a lot of people who just don't feel like welcome in the industry, right? And there are tons of really awesome people out there who do a great job of championing like voices in different topics, whether that's like from a gender equality perspective or like a racial equality perspective or like what Marley Blonsky is doing with All Bodies on Bikes. There are tons of great people out there who are kind of championing like intersectionality and voices about just like getting more people of all types of all backgrounds on bicycles. And because yeah, there are a lot of people who they walk into a bike shop and based on who they are, they get treated differently. So that's kind of another bucket aspect of it. But then also, like if you just want to ride your bike around, there are a ton of resources out there that are really beneficial to know about. A lot of just topics, ideas that are beneficial to know about. But I found is that they really are spread a lot by word of mouth because a lot of times it's about like your local resources, right? So like if you're a local advocacy organization and you are trying to reach people in your local area, you're not going to spend that time talking to someone on the other side of the country. So your outreach, your just range is limited to a geographical region. So the approach here, I've kind of been like, well, yeah, I don't need to interview every single local organization, but if I do an episode on like what an advocacy org is, why they're important, and how to find one, anyone who hears that, right, they're like, oh, that's cool. Now I feel equipped to go and find that resource in my area. So that's kind of what that's been is like almost like a glossary, like an index of just like what is an advocacy org, what's a bike kitchen, like how do you ride in the winter? And I've been trying to specifically like highlight people from different regions to get that spread and say like, yeah, okay, yeah, you don't have to live in Alaska to ride year round. But here's how they do in Alaska, right? You don't have to be from Seattle to get involved with the bicycle, and use that for social justice. But here's an example of how they do that there. So, yeah.
Yeah, and again, it's been an amazing job. I love the conversations, and I've always said this too. Within my job, and also with on the podcast, is that conversations and the people you meet, they can change your life if you
Yeah.
just hear one little thing, plants a little idea in your mind, and then your brain goes with that, and then you never know where that will take you. And so, opening up those conversations for those things. And as you were talking, I was reminded of, and I think we've talked about this in our other conversations, is the new book that Peter Flax put out. It's called Live to Ride, and one of the very first lines in the book, and it's on the back cover, says, if you're going by bicycle, you're doing it right.
Mhm.
And that's his whole MO, is just melding all the different bicycle cultures into one. And I love that you said that it's not necessarily the sport of bicycle riding, it's just bicycle riding, right? All the different genres, all the different ways that can do it. And we have a lot more in common, and using that commonality and that connection. So yeah, as you've been riding, as you've been experiencing the joy of riding, that's what I love to ask people when they come on this show, Liam, is how has bicycle riding improved your mental health? How has it improved your overall wellness? What benefits have you seen in your life?
Yeah. And I know that we talked a lot about this on like the episode that we did together, which either if this is out by that time or will be out shortly, like plug for that, go check that out. Zach, you honestly had like so much amazing knowledge to talk about like the benefits of riding a bike for mental health. So uh, I relate to a lot of that. Uh, but I guess personally for me, like I've definitely used, the bike for me is a great way to like hop on and just cruise around, even if it's just for like 20 minutes, right? Just to like go de-stress, right? It's like I feel way better doing that than like, oh cool, let me sit down for an hour, like mindlessly scroll through Instagram, right? um and again, like there's a lot of like physical benefits of the bike as well, which I have also been fortunate to like feel those benefits of, and if that makes sense. So like actually a really like relevant example is, so in college I got really big into rock climbing, and I still do now, not as much as I did, mainly because the summer before my senior year I was just like in a rock gym like 4 days a week because like I wasn't in school, I didn't have anything else to do. I was like, cool, I'll just climb like every day. Turns out that that's not great for your body to overexert it in that way. And then I herniated a disc in my lower back, and
Oh man.
so I yeah, not great, don't recommend that. Quite uncomfortable, decent amount of pain for like better part of 2 years. Had a fantastic pair of like physical therapists office that I was able to work with. Um, but that rock climbing for me was a really large way of like I'd go there with friends. It was a great community, right? Like I'd get that benefit, and obviously also like the physical benefits. Like rock climbing was, and like and still is to this day. Like when I was climbing that much in college, like I could do like pull ups multiple, and I was like, yeah, like this feels good. I was like, awesome. Um, but while I wasn't able to climb, I was still able to ride my bike. Now I wasn't really able, like during the recovery, to like, oh, let me hit this drop, right? Let me ride over this rock garden, because that was still quite uncomfortable. But it was a way for me to still be active, right? It was a way for me to still like leave the house and get that movement, and not like sit inside and get like cabin fever and like go slowly insane. So the for me there, it was like, yeah, while I was not able to continue doing the activities that I liked because they would further like injure my body, I was able to continue still riding a bicycle because it wasn't going to cause that discomfort. So
Yeah, that's a great point, and I can relate to that a lot too, dealing with different injuries and stuff, and being able to still just ride, even if it's just around the block or down the street. That's something that just frees up your mind and your mental capacity. So, yeah, I mean, you probably work a lot from home, or maybe you go to an office? Do you do a lot of bike commuting? Like what do you just go for a ride around the like what is your bike riding look like now?
Yeah, so right now I'll admit it's kind of well actually so if we look at my Garmin, I'm actually doing more riding this year than I have in previous years, but it's a different type of riding. So I don't live very close to my office. It's usually like a drive. I'm a hybrid, so I'm usually working at home most days. So I'm not really commuting anywhere. When I do go in, it's like I have to drive. It just wouldn't be feasible by bike. It would take me a couple hours probably. But when I've lived close enough to work to commute by bike, absolutely. Like I used to live like a mile and a half from the office, and so basically, if it wasn't 100 degrees out or raining, yeah, I'd get on my Brompton, I'd ride, I'd fold it up, put it underneath my desk, and I loved it because it was such a phenomenal way to incorporate riding just into my daily life. And I'm a huge advocate for that because again, sometimes like I will recommend that people ride a bike as much as they can, but sometimes you work an 8 hour shift or longer and you're just like, I am exhausted and I just want to go home and lie down. And then honestly, it can be really hard to get out on a bike and go ride for 30 minutes or more after that. Like that, I get that. I relate to that. But if it's something where you're easily able to like incorporate it just into your day-to-day life, like it's awesome because you're still getting that time out, that fresh air, that movement. Um, it's just kind of built into your day. It becomes more routine. It's not like you're having to make a choice to do it. You're just kind of doing it in the same way that, I'm not necessarily like making a choice to go drive my car. I'm just kind of doing it. It's part of my routine to get to work. But yeah, whenever I've been able to incorporate the bike into my commute, I have. And that's, I mean, a couple different forms. I worked at a shop in Rochester where I went to college, and there's the Erie Canal Trail that runs, the length of the state, and the shop was on the trail. My house that I lived in was on the trail. So yeah, I'd ride to work on that bike path. And that was great because it was like a great way to start the day and a great way to end the day. Now, again, sometimes you work that 8 hour shift in the summer in the bike shop and then you're like, oh, it's exhausting. I'm ready to go home. And I was like, I rode my bike in today. All right. So it was a little slower return home, but yeah, I've loved commuting. I'm unfortunately just not in a spot like where it is feasible to commute by bike now. That may change in the future, but yeah, whenever I can, I like incorporating the bike just into like my daily routine as much as possible.
Yeah, that's great advice. And I'm reminded as you're talking about that, I'm reminded I went to this training years and years ago for therapists working in different places, and they talked about incorporating those elements of self care into your day. And that one of the presenters that said you have to bake it in, like you're baking a recipe. Like that's part of the ingredient is you bake in these self care moments
Mhm.
throughout the day that really help energize you and give you that needed motivation. And that has always really stuck with me. All of us will work difficult jobs or difficult situations, and it's always good to just take, even if it's just 30 seconds, a minute of like, hey, even if I'm driving,
Yeah.
what am I going to be listening to in that moment that's really
Mhm.
going to motivate me or give me that, again, that energy or help me throughout the day. So looking at your day, instead of, oh, this is so overwhelming, but those small little moments of baked in self-care. And so yeah, the bicycle is a major component of that for me, for sure. And so and that's the whole idea with my
Yeah.
show, is I just try to encourage and help people realize that for themselves too, is just, hey, yeah, even if I go for a ride around the block with my kids, great, that's awesome. And even if it's just a couple minutes, that can really have a lot of positive mental health benefits for sure. So great stuff, Liam.
Yeah. Well, and like we talked about this too, like in our previous conversation, just like I'd get asked all the time because I lived a mile and a half from work, right? It was, to be honest, it was a fairly easy decision to make. But I'd get asked, like, why do you bike into work? And it's like, well, I'll be honest, it wasn't for the gas savings, right? It's like I have a hybrid car and it's a mile and a half. So cool, I may be saving like $3 a week in gas, right? Wasn't really for the exercise. Again, it's not like a super long ride, but just really like, I don't know. I don't like sitting in traffic. I don't have to do that on a bike. Generally, I don't think most people like paying for gas. I don't have to do that on a bike. And it's like, yeah, if I could choose between getting an extra 30 minutes of fresh air every day or sitting in a car for 30 minutes, I know what I'm going to choose, and it's going to be that. And so like I guess that's kind of my spiel here too, is like, anyone listening, if you have a chance to incorporate a bike into your commute, and it doesn't have to be all or nothing, right? It doesn't have to be 5 days a week. I'm gonna rain or shine commute. If it's a 1 day a week thing when the weather's convenient, even that alone, like I think is just it's like I'd show up to work and I would just be way more refreshed. Like I'd be energized. I'd be like, all right, I'm feeling ready to start the day. And again, like sometimes you have that long day and you're like, oh man, I had to reply to so many emails today. Like my brain is just jumbled. Cool. You hop on that bike and by that, like the 10 minutes it takes me to get home, like I'm feeling better because it's like, oh, cool. Maybe I'm going to cut through the park today. Right. And maybe on my ride home, I'm going to stop at like the ice cream stand. Right. Or I'm going to stop and I'm going to like, check out the ducks in the pond, right? And it's a lot easier to do that on a bike than it is on a car. And it's amazing how many like different little opportunities that present themselves on your bike rather than on the car.
Yeah, and I mean, we're recording this in the summer. Whenever you're listening to it, cool. But I've made it my own kind of goal or just kind of idea. I keep a couple dollar bills in my pocket whenever I ride. Lemonade stands are everywhere right now, right?
Yeah.
And just seeing little kids out, and I have kids that sell lemonade, so I definitely have a greater appreciation for when people stop and they, buy some lemonade. But it's so much easier on a bike, and it's also refreshing and it's fun to just kind of chat with the kids for a second. So that's my whole thing right now. It's like, hey, if I see a lemonade stand, I'm stopping. I'm
Yeah.
giving them a couple bucks. I'm getting a refreshment. So it's awesome. I love it. I love it.
I love that.
Well, I
Yeah.
want to ask you this, Liam. I mean, you're definitely very qualified for this, working in a bike shop. I'm sure you've helped a lot of people, right? So if someone's just getting back into bicycle riding or, thinking about starting it out again, what advice, what tips would you give them? How would they go about that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's a couple, and like I could rattle off some like real kind of like tactical ones. Um, I mean, hey, like I, first and foremost, like kind of figure out like maybe figure out's the right word, but it's like understand like the what you're looking for out of a bike, right? And because I think like knowing what you're looking for going into it, and again, there's no metric for success, right? It's not like, oh, I need to hit that 100 mile, right? It's just about like knowing the needs for yourself that you're trying to meet with the bike, right? Because having a clear picture of that, I think, is going to better set you up for success. Because if you're just like, yeah, I know who I am. I just want to ride around the neighborhood. Cool. Figuring out like what you need for that, like how to get set up for that, is going to be a lot more straightforwards. Just like for your own journey. Um, I think when we start thinking about like finding the right shop, what I tell people is like try out a couple, go to a couple different shops, and it's okay to find one that meshes best with you as a rider and what you're looking for, right? Yeah, if you are the type of rider who wants to do exclusively road biking and go crush a bunch of 100-mile rides, and like you want to do group rides, like that's something you're looking for, cool, go find a shop that offers those things. If that's not you, and again, like that's totally fine. Like I don't want everyone to feel like they need to fit into a particular box in this industry. Check out a couple shops, find one that is welcoming and is going to like meet and serve your needs as a rider, whatever they may be, right? Whether that's more of like, hey, we do fix a flat clinics every Tuesday, right? Or we host like uh, you know casual like women's rides on Thursdays, right? It's okay to like shop around and find a in community that meshes best with your needs as a rider, and that doesn't always have to be a bike shop, right? Shops are a part of like the greater bicycle ecosystem, right? At their base, they are a retail organization that serves to sell you a product, and we could dive into that for another hour or two at least, right? Some shops do that better than others. I've certainly got my opinions, but the shops are not the entirety of the experience. There are tons of great community groups, right? And whether that's like hey, we're a group and we do casual rides every Saturdays, or hey, we're an advocacy group and these are the projects we're working on. Your experience and your like life with a bicycle does not need to be dictated by the retail establishment you shop at either, right? It is okay to um, like be part of stuff that's outside of a bike shop. And again, if you're like, yeah, I need some tubes, right? I need some tires. Like, yeah, go to the shop. That's where you're gonna go. So it's okay if like your shop is not meeting like all of your needs as a community. There are great communities out there that I think people also should um, look for and strive for. Um, I think bigger picture too is like take that leap, and that's definitely something a little bit like I need to kind of also follow my own advice there. Um, of just like yeah, again, sometimes it's like oh, it's like yeah, and like I live like examples like I live like a mile and a half from the supermarket. I'll be 100% honest. Not every trip I make is by bike. I should do that more because but there's that little bit of like, oh, you know what? Yeah, I gotta kind of make the slightly less convenient choice, but I know I'm also gonna still feel pretty good like riding my bike. Like I'm still gonna like I'm gonna get those benefits. It might be a little bit slower, but I should make that choice. And again, whether that's like making that ride to the grocery store by bike or if it's joining that, local group, right? Signing up for that like charity ride, right? I'd say it's just like, hey, yeah, it is a bit uncomfortable. Like we don't need to pretend that it isn't. Sometimes taking that first step can be intimidating, but like that's what I'd say. It's like take that first step, take that leap, like be willing to be a little bit uncomfortable, because when you do, you meet some really awesome people and you get some really cool experiences.
Yeah, again, great advice. I'm all about supporting local. Finding a local bike shop that meets your needs, and I love that advice too. Just finding one that you feel comfortable with, and they can serve a lot of different avenues of those things. And Liam, it's okay if you don't ride to the store every day.
Yeah,
it's okay. You can still,
exactly.
I feel that sometimes too. I'm like, oh man, if I drive my car to this, or my other bicycle riding comrade's gonna see me, like, what are you doing in the car? No, it's okay. We all have to drive sometimes. That's all good.
Yeah, at risk of losing my urbanist clout, I do not make every trip by bicycle.
Yeah,
Uh,
I hear you. I hear you. Well, Liam, as far as the future goes for you, what goals do you have as far as whether it be bicycle riding or your podcast, biking, non-biking? What are some things you hope to accomplish and things you want to pursue?
yeah, I love it, and I know we got these questions kind of in advance, and that one was one I was stoked to think about. Um, so biking wise, specifically, definitely in general, just to kind of carve out time to ride more. Whatever that is, whether that's casual, whether that's long distance, mountain, whatever. I've realized that I just don't make enough time for myself to get on the bike as much as I would like to. So that's kind of big picture. Um, Specifically, though, there's this trail that goes from like a town near me in Western Mass. It goes like just about all the way into New Haven, like Connecticut, and it's almost entirely separated from the road. It's 60 miles one way, 120 like round trip. I want to try to do that this summer. We'll see. I've never done like 100 miles in a day, much less 120 miles in a day.
All right.
We'll see if I do that this summer. Who knows? That would be cool. Non-biking, like you meant, like keep growing the podcast, keep talking to cool people, and then outside of all of it, I'm kind of getting into gardening a little bit this summer, and I've got like a couple tomato plants going, and so I'm hopeful that that's my goal. Is I want like a good tomato harvest. Is my other
Hey.
goal. It's just
Yeah.
like
Oh yeah.
get some of those going.
Nothing like a fresh garden
Yeah.
tomato.
No,
That's the best.
I love tomatoes. I'm an absolute fiend for tomatoes, and that's why I've started growing. As I'm like, I'll blow through my bank account if I keep buying tomatoes at the grocery store.
Oh, that's well, the 120-mile ride. That sounds awesome. I mean, totally doable. You could do it. No problem.
We'll
Just
see.
saddle up, mentally prepare.
Yeah.
Take some breaks. You'll be fine. And yeah,
Yeah.
and I love the also the goal of just taking a little bit more time. Just even if it's just a few extra minutes. Just having those moments. That's awesome. So Great advice, Liam. I appreciate you carving out a
Thank
little
you.
bit of your
Yeah.
time to be on the show today. And I'll continue to follow the work that you do and hearing the great guests that you have on. So again, I appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Yeah, likewise, man. I thank you for being here and asking these awesome questions and fostering this sweet discussion, man.
Absolutely, absolutely. All right, Liam. Well, we'll have a good day, and we'll talk again soon.
All right.